Welcome back to Built to Ship, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with founders and product leaders shipping real AI products into the world. Today I'm joined by Adam Stansell, co-founder and CEO of Axle Health, a company that's applying AI to the messy world of healthcare logistics, from optimizing clinician routes to automating patient communication. Axle recently raised a $10 million Series A led by F Prime. Congrats, and is scaling fast. Excited to dig into how they're building and shipping. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I want to start from, background and how you came up with the idea of Axle. So what were you doing before that? Tell me a bit about that journey. I know you were at Uber and some other places.
Yeah. So I guess very high level, I started off in management consulting, which I did it. And then I moved to the world of tech, which was much more up my alley, I think. Joined Uber. This is beginning of 2017, back when Uber Eats was first getting launched. So I got to launch Eats in New Jersey and a bunch of other markets in the Northeast. And first taste of like building things, right? I don't know. I dunk on consulting all the time, but it was good experience. The biggest issue for me was that you don't actually build anything, right? You're kind of there to just opine, right? You kind of like you jump in. Okay, great. Here's what I think, and here's a deck, and like I'm gonna run away before I actually see whether I was right and whether like if you took my recommendations that things would actually improve. So it's completely disconnected from outcomes. You didn't actually get to like experience that feeling of just creating a thing. And Uber is the exact opposite, right? I got in trouble at various points for being so decentralized and giving ground level folks so much autonomy. But for me, it's fantastic. I got to run in and literally just like build a little business unit. And so I did that a couple of years, stuck it out through the IPO. I ticked the box. Joined a company called Motive up in the Bay. Used to be called Keep Trucking. RIP to the original name. New name is better, but we got some attachment to the original name. Very much in the like logistics tech world. I think it's a fleet management and telematics and kind of general hardware plus software for trucking companies, but very much focused on this idea of resource utilization and how you can like really effectively manage, in this case, fleet of vehicles and drivers really focused on that utilization question. And so super cool role. They brought me in to build up a new business. So I basically got to come in and like, figure out the new product, but then also hired a sales team and, figure out like marketing enablement, all these different go-to-market functions that you need at a bigger scaled company like that. Did that for a couple of years, and then COVID happened. And started chatting with a buddy from Columbia. He was an engineer, been in healthcare his whole career, started kicking around this like healthcare plus logistics idea. Applied to YC, got in, and here we are.
Amazing. I want to dig into a couple things there. Number one, you dunk on consulting, which I think is a pretty common sort of thing for people to make fun of. But at the same time, I'm curious, like, was there anything you took out of it? Like, do you think there's any value in that? Because I know one of your titles at Uber was strategy. I wanted to ask, like, people often desire a strategy role because it sounds so like big picture. What does that actually entail? And was that similar to consulting in any way?
Yeah, it was. And honestly, consulting was good for a lot of things. It was never going to be the place I spent the bulk of my career. But it was a great place to start my career because it's a crash course in analytics. You do have to get really good at just like synthesizing data and kind of figuring out how to gather insights, but then also tell a story based on that data. Storytelling piece also, people make fun of consultants for flowcharts and decks, but you get really good at building flowcharts and decks, right? And those are useful tools. There's a reason they exist, and they're so common. Obviously, they're overused, we trying to do too much of either at Axle, but the skills you build there, they're definitely useful. And then the short answer was strategy at Uber was internal consulting, right? You are thinking about many of the same problems and using many of the same tools to solve those problems. Uber was very sophisticated from a data analysis standpoint. So, certainly more quantitative approach to problem solving than, consulting, where you're constrained by your client's data capabilities. And so, if you're going in consulting for a Fortune 50 company, they might have like a legacy tech stack. They don't really have good, clean data. It's a little bit harder. Uber had phenomenal data. So, spend a lot more time on that side of things. But yeah, ultimately this idea of we have a question to answer. We're going to use the tools available to us, whether that's, querying the database directly or just like, chatting with different teams and like getting their inputs into things. We're going to develop a recommendation, then we're going to take it around to all the different stakeholders that care about this problem and hopefully get alignment and get somebody to go execute on this thing. Really nice mirror for what I've done before. Obviously, it's for one company where you go very deep instead of for a bunch of companies where you're very broad. So I think that's part of why you get people that prefer the consulting approach. They just like that variety and that exposure. For me, I like going deep. I like being able to like really dig into a problem and the other piece of it is seeing it actually get solved. Like that's kind of the biggest that gives me the most satisfaction out of the entire process. So I definitely liked strategy at Uber better than I liked consulting, but I like being a founder better than both of those things. So I don't know what that says about me.
Yeah, here. Okay, one more question on consulting, just because I'm curious, and then we can move
Yeah.
on. So I've done just a little bit of, consulting here and there from people in my network who really needed help with, setting up data infrastructure, analytics, that kind of thing, which used to be my sort of main focus. I really struggled when someone would ask my advice, and then, I'd give them, this plan with like real data on how this has worked before, etc. And then they're like super happy with that sort of analysis, but they decide to do something else.
Yep.
They're not upset. They're like, you did your job, we're happy.
Yeah.
And then they go and make this thing that turns into a mistake, and 6 months later, my advice was right. Like I struggled with that. How did you ever experience that, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, all the time. And the way it's solved at many of the big consulting shops is that your engagement ends with the recommendation. So you don't actually there are plenty of places that'll carry it through to implementation, right? So you've got different consulting models. I was on the like strategy consulting version of it, which is typically upstream, right? To where you are your engagement would often end with that recommendation and you then move on to the next one. And so you don't get that feedback loop of like, was this correct? Did we do our analysis correctly? Was this like the right answer for this customer? We also don't have that frustration of like, we did all of this work and then they just like, said, thank you, paid us. And then, threw it in the garbage and went off and did whatever they're going to do anyway. Cause you do get that a lot, right? It's you're being asked your opinion. That doesn't mean that they're required to listen. And so I think that was the core frustration for me. It sounds like for you too, like this idea that you spend all this time thinking about this problem and then you don't get to actually execute on the solution. And for all of the pros and cons of being a founder, that is one of the biggest pros is like, no, if there's a problem, like I get to go solve it. I don't have to ask anybody's permission to, whatever. It's like, okay, this is where, we need to go do this thing. We're going to go do this thing.
Definitely. Yeah. And on the note of execution, tell me more about what Axel does for your customers. Like, who does your customer look like?
Yeah.
What things are you solving for them?
Customers are home health providers, and we are solving, really, we think about it as like the field operations problem. So there's good examples in other industries. ServiceTitan is actually a good example up here in LA, but of companies that are solving this field operations problem for non-healthcare, right? So if you're a plumbing company, you need to think about, okay, well, we've got clients calling in, and how do we make sure that we've got somebody that can go see them, and like who's the optimal person to go see them based on who's in the area, but then also what tools do they have in the truck with them, and what's their skill set? Have they seen this problem before? Do customers like them? Or are they kind of a jerk? Like all of that stuff, right? So there's a lot of logic that goes into that operations problem, and so that's solved in other industries. In healthcare, it's a million times more complicated, right? Because you have, first of all, you have different clinical licensures, right? Different clinical specialties, and so you might have a patient that needs to be seen by 4 or 5 different clinicians to cover the range of clinical use cases there. Within each of those specialties, there's then different licensures, right? So you've got physical therapy, you've got both a PT and a PT assistant, right? And so you might need the physical therapist to go do the initial assessment, but then you can have a PT assistant go do some of the routine visits. So you've got this like kind of multidimensional assignment problem within just the like clinical use case piece. You've got patient preferences, right? If it's a plumbing company, most of the time when I call a plumber, I'm not really hanging out with them the whole time, right? I let them in the door and then they go do their thing. And maybe I'm like around to answer questions, but I don't have to interact with them, on a deep basis. If you've got a nurse coming into your home to like treat your wound, you're going to spend a lot of time with them, right? So you need to like them. You need to speak the same language as them, right? There's a whole language matching. Oftentimes there's a gender preference within home health, right? If you've got older patients, maybe you've got an older woman who prefers to be seen by a female nurse versus having a male nurse in their home. So all kinds of different patient preferences, clinical preferences. You've got that same geographic problem of like, how do you make sure people are clustered and like doing, minimizing windshield time basically and drive time. And then you've also got like a caseload problem, right? You've got a utilization balancing you need to do across different types of providers. Some clinicians are full-time, some are part-time, some are per diem, some are paid per visit. Long-winded way of saying it's a hard problem. And so we build software to basically solve that entire scheduling and workforce management problem for home health providers.
Well, through all of that, I'm hearing logistics. There's just a ton of that, and which is obviously your background. So I think like a lot of things we hear from YC about like how they look for founders, and everyone can have like an idea. It's easy. It's funny how often I talk to like some founder who wants to apply to YC, and they're like, "Hey, I want your advice, but I'm also scared to tell you about my idea." And it's like, we got our own things to build. We're not gonna like go steal your idea. Actually, the thing that sets you apart often is having that background in these problems. Maybe someone else also feels like this is a problem that needs to be solved, but you actually have done this kind of work at other companies. How much of that like is applicable to what you've done at Axle? How much did you bring from your experience in other places? Towards building a product?
A lot of it, and also very little of it, if that's an acceptable answer. The meta problem of like resource utilization, right? How do we make sure that there's a two-directional problem there, right? Because on the one hand, you need to make sure that, okay, for this given pool of patients, we want to make sure that our scheduled efficiency is optimized, right? So we need to create kind of in like our ivory tower, here's the schedule that best suits every patient's needs, given the clinician characteristics, all that stuff. There's then the separate question, which is especially salient in healthcare, where you don't necessarily have, where the patient's not necessarily the one paying for each visit. Engagement and show rate really is pretty meaningful, right? If I'm a plumbing company, if there's a house call and I send a plumber and the person's not there, chances are I just charge the customer who wasn't there, and like I don't care either way, right? I kind of get my money. Within healthcare, you have to bill for services, and so if you've got a Medicare patient who's they need home health, but maybe they're homebound, but they can still get out occasionally for exercise, or their family member comes to take them out for lunch or whatever. No-show rate in the industry is pretty high, right? It's about 13% for skilled home health, which means that you send somebody to drive to the patient's home. They're planning on spending an hour there and then driving back, and then the patient's not there. That's an hour and a half plus of dead time for that clinician. And so you've got this like really interesting patient engagement problem of how do we get that no-show rate down? And that's completely different from like Uber or Motive. Motive was very much scheduled efficiency. You have essentially you have homogenous demand, which is really just like, where do we need people to be going? You didn't really have any variability within that. You just need somebody here, and then, okay, maybe there's some characteristics of the supply that can satisfy that demand, but ultimately it is homogenous demand. And with Uber, first of all, it's a much more real-time problem. You're not scheduling these things out in advance. You're kind of doing the dispatching in real time. And then you also, rider engagement. In theory, you got people that, you charge them for wait time. But like, you don't really have no-shows in the same way. And if you do, it's not that big a deal because the driver's just on to the next ride. And so that was a completely novel problem for us to solve, right? You've got the logistics side. There's a lot that you can port over because it is, at the end of the day, there's a similar problem of resource utilization. How do you really maximize your efficiency within this? Obviously, a bunch of novel dimensions around like clinical licensure, all that stuff. So had to learn a lot, but the core problem is very similar. Patient engagement is a whole other animal, right? Because that's, first of all, now you're dealing with like unstructured communications and like how do we make sure that we're engaging people at the right time in the right moments and ways to maximize these end objectives. We're also dealing with humans, right? So you've got, okay, well, we know that for 99% of patients, they're going to really appreciate getting a reminder text, a couple hours before their visit. And then 1% are going to absolutely lose it and like call Medicare hotline and complain about it. It's like, so how do we build tech that can actually like adapt to different patient preferences and think about these, not just as like, one kind of single point solution for everybody, but building really tailored messaging and tailored triggers for each of those messages based on the patient themselves.
Awesome. So I'm hearing customization, lots of orchestration of like logistical things. This all makes me think of AI. But how much, there's always this question of how much of AI is hype versus actually useful. You know, what I don't know how to quantify this, but like what percent of your product is leveraging AI? Where do you actually see it useful versus fall down? How do you think
Yeah.
about LLMs and Gen AI in your systems, or even traditional AI use
Yeah.
cases?
Yeah. So, I mean, on the logistics side, there are very good solutions to slices of that problem that predate LLMs, right? Like, my favorite example in the logistics world, UPS trucks don't turn left, right? They literally like when they're mapping out their routes, they like have a cost minimization function that includes the cost of turning left on any given street. And so like the level of sophistication there, phenomenal, right? And it's been around for years, probably decades. I don't know how long UPS is like left turning thing, whatever. Like that's not a last like 5 years type of thing. So you have some like tech there that the traveling salesman problem is already like it's not solved. There's no algorithmic solution, but there's really good heuristics you can use. And like that's all kind of operations research that has been around for decades. That said, there's with our problem because it's so multidimensional. There's a lot of iterative optimization you need to do, and so you need to be thinking about okay, well, not just what would we guess would be the most optimal solution here, but based on like the clinician acceptance rates and based on patient show rates and all these other things like how can we iterate on this to get to a point where we are fundamentally better than the like blind solution we started off with in the first place. I would say the place where we have a complete unlock in how we think about our product is on the patient engagement piece, because that is fundamentally unstructured data, right? And we need to be really the old solutions of like, well, we're just going to send you a confirmation text when you book, and then we're going to show up and hope that you're there. Doesn't work, right? And so, not only are we thinking about, okay, well, how can we predict patients' behaviors and whatever else, but like how can we actually translate all these, these texts going back and forth? How can we translate that into structured data to then use that in our algorithm for all the other logistics side of things? You get really nice complementarity there. And so you have basically like, I would call it the V1 version, which would have been fairly blind to both the realities on the ground and to individual patient customization. You then layer on top of that everything we can do now with, okay, well, this patient, keeps every time we send them a confirmation text, they keep, telling us like, hey, shut up, go away. Like, okay, let's like stop sending them confirmation text. Or, this patient just told the nurse that they can't be seen until 2, even though we got them scheduled for 1. Okay, let's go, A, automatically update that in the system, but then B, update their preferences on an ongoing basis that we're trying to get them in at 2 instead of 1 next week, right? So all of that stuff you can do with really good kind of you need really good underlying technology to solve that problem in a programmatic way. Didn't exist a couple of years ago. It exists today. And so we've been able to kind of really outpace everybody else in the industry because we're starting from a place of how can we use best-in-class technology to build from the ground up a solution to this problem. Everybody else in the industry has been around, home health's been around for decades. They're starting from a place of, well, what worked 10, 15 years ago, and like, how can we improve on that to solve this problem today? We're playing different games.
Interesting. So when it comes to those like use cases for AI, if I'm understanding correctly, or at least let's say LLMs and Gen AI,
Yeah.
You're focusing mostly on unstructured data, maybe even in cases where it's kind of like you're using LLMs for pre-processing, if I'm understanding. Like you take this unstructured data, you have the LLM, synthesize it or read through it or understand it, and then you structure that in a way that it can go into more traditional machine learning models or other structured systems. Is that one of the use
Yep.
cases? Okay.
100%. Yeah. And
Awesome.
I mean, especially you think about the scheduling problem, it's actually a very discrete problem, right? You have a set of available slots, and then you have a single output, which is the slot that's been selected. And so it's kind of thing that, AI is already very good at getting to a defined answer on that problem. And being able to then take across all these different, different data sources. Okay, well, we know this patient, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They prefer these things, but then also they've got these visits. We can see based, from their health system, we can see from the EMR, they're doing these visits. And, wherever we're getting that data from, being able to synthesize that into one place and then use that to define what's the optimal output across all of these different patients, all these different visits. There's no way to do that initial data synthesis without being able to use AI.
Amazing. Are there any use cases that you guys, as ChatGPT was taking off, as LLMs were becoming, more popular, you started to think about how you incorporate these into your product? Were there things that you thought, hey, it'll be great for this, let's try it, and then it just completely failed? Or have you been pretty good at like your hit rate of like, okay, let's use it for this and not this?
So I guess the one place where we had surprising outcomes was and I guess there's two components to this price here. So I don't answer phone calls, right? If I get a call from a number I don't recognize, I don't answer it. What we've heard is that most of the country is that way, right? Like most people won't answer unidentified phone numbers. And so our assumption was great. Everybody texts, let's do text. And then also that more information is better, right? That patients will strictly prefer more visibility to less visibility. Dealing with seniors and homebound patients, a lot of them don't text, a lot of them still are on landlines, which that's a whole new can of worms. And then also you get a range of preferences. Some people don't want to be bothered and don't want to have that reminder text come through, however many hours in advance. And so, yeah, we had to rethink how we, obviously you don't want to blow people's phones up, but like we kind of were able to use our own sensibilities on, well, I think if I got, I don't know, 2 reminder texts before someone's going to show up to my home, it feels like a reasonable number of texts to get. Not for everybody, right? Turns out you need to kind of adapt to that piece of it. And then certainly on just like the modality as a whole, texting is not going to work for everybody. And so, I won't say it was, I think it was really just understanding user behavior more than like us not understanding the capabilities of the technology. But we've had to rethink how we handle some of those, because you need to give people what they want, right? And for certain patients, that's might be different than others.
Totally. When it comes to your team, like who's building, AI features? Do you have like dedicated machine learning engineers? Is it software engineers who are using like OpenAI APIs, things like that? I'm always curious to see. I feel like the space is still evolving in terms of titles. We saw like prompt engineer become popular for a while, and now a lot of people's resumes say AI engineer, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean they're
Nobody does
training.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it like for Axel?
Everybody's full stack. So everybody's, touching this stuff, but we don't have a like dedicated, oh, you're a prompt engineer, so you're the one that gets to play around with the stuff. In my mind, you need to be a really smart technical thinker to understand how these systems work and to be able to build technology on top of them. You don't need to be like, maybe someone's gonna yell at me. I don't think you need to be like go through a LinkedIn training course on like how to write a good prompt writer. I just think there's experience, and then there's a more meta skill of iteration. And I think good engineers are really good at iterating. You don't necessarily need to be trained on like the specific things to try when you're trying to write a set of prompts. It's just, okay, let's like try some stuff, figure out what works and what doesn't. Like let's be intelligent about how we're going to test things out. But ultimately, it's not it's not about having like a distinct title or training or certification, anything like that. I just want smart people that are good technical thinkers that can go solve these problems.
Totally. Yeah, love that. We have actually a question from a viewer. I'll read it out to you. He asked can you talk about why you decided to pivot from a service model to licensing from like a strategy perspective?
Yeah. The short answer is being a service provider is really hard. So the initial context, the initial business model was we were a home health provider ourselves. So we had our own tech stack, but then we also had a network of clinicians and nurses and other clinical staff running around the city, offering services in home. We found out after a couple of years, A, really, really hard to provide services. B, we built really good tech. And then C, nobody else had good tech. And so kind of a natural pivot, right? Our comparative advantage was not on the services side, it was on the technology side. And there's a clear need in the market for that technology. And so, best for everybody if we stop trying to compete, as a provider ourselves, and start trying to just unlock all that same efficiency for everybody else in the space.
Well, on that note, you were talking earlier about how you can you move so much quicker than your tech side competitors in the space, and how they're still thinking about how things were done 15 years ago. Is that I assume compliance is something I hear all the time. People being concerned for good reason, right? Like you want to think about a new tech, how secure is it, blah, blah, blah. But it feels less like people at certain companies and industries are trying to actually solve the problem and more like, hey, let's just talk about it and put blockers up. Do you think is that happening with your competition? Is that one of the things that gives you guys an advantage?
Totally.
You're like, yeah. How
Yeah.
do you approach that side then? The
Yeah.
compliance and
So, okay, I think there's a couple dimensions here. One, compliance is typically a bar to clear, which means that you should figure out what it takes to clear that bar, and then you should quickly clear that bar, and then you should get back to building the things that you want to build. And there's a skill to being able to clear that bar quickly. Some of it comes down to like having a sophisticated tech stack to where, for us, for example, we're all cloud based. So like all of our stuff started in AWS servers. And if there's data storage requirements for a given state, it's like pretty easy for us to accommodate those because we've got like a modern tech stack. Well, if you're like built something on-prem 20 years ago and you're trying to like figure out how to retrofit for these like new data requirements, like that gets actually pretty difficult, right? And so just being built on a modern tech stack is already a leg up there. The other thing I'd say, I don't know that it's compliance necessarily that's slowing down incumbents. I think there's a couple things. One, there's a million B school case studies and books about this stuff, but this idea of like, you get stuck into how you think about a problem, right? And so if I'm approaching a problem from a 10, 15 years ago mindset, I'm not thinking about, well, technology's gotten really good and we can now have, automated conversations with patients that feel very legitimate and that can address some of these same needs with, without having a human involved. We can approach this problem from that kind of new mindset. Whereas somebody's been around, building the same thing for 10 years is a lot harder for them to do that. And the other thing I'd say, and not to dunk on private equity, but basically all of like the big software platforms in the space are PE owned, and they view their code base as an asset to be monetized and to extract cash from. And that's fine, right? These are good products, and they were built as good products when they were built. And somebody should be monetizing that, and hopefully somebody cashed out. Like, great, no hard feelings anywhere. But you're just not investing in R&D in the same way that we are, that other venture-backed vendors in the space are, because what we're thinking about is, well, what does this look like 5 years from now, and how do we build the all-encompassing solution to this operations problem in a way that literally automates everything. That's just not the approach you're going to take if you're trying to extract cash today. And so it's almost structural, right? It's not even that there's different priorities or anything else. I think it's a combination of, if you inherited a legacy tech stack, you're at a disadvantage. But then if you're also inheriting a financial model that's geared towards different objectives, then you're just going to operate differently. And for us, we're more than happy to take advantage of that difference.
Amazing. Well, on the note of the 5-year plan, what is that, or what's the next step, even if it's next week, or you just raised this Series A. Congratulations again. What are you gonna do with it?
Hire.
Okay.
Good people in LA. If anybody's product sales, engineering across the board, please do reach out. Happy to chat. As far as the 5-year plan, so I won't get too in the weeds on all of our state secrets. I think the way to think about the problem space, generally speaking, you've got a pool of patients that's somewhat fixed, right? This is a set of patients for whom home health is the appropriate next step in their treatment journey. That piece is fairly fixed. You have a pool of clinicians that's somewhat fixed, but also somewhat variable, and it's fluid because people keep, the turnover in the space is super high. People move from agency to agency. It's also fluid in that you've got people can allocate time across different modalities. And so you've got folks that are working part-time home health and part-time at like a hospital or whatever else, and you kind of flex there. It's also variable over time because you want to bring more clinicians into the space, right? And there's a lot of really interesting companies working on expanding the pool of clinicians available. And so for us, what we think about is if you've got a fixed demand and then you've got a variable supply, there's all kinds of places you can plug in to help try and match those better, right? And so, maybe it's not just okay, given the set of clinicians you have, how can we optimally assign those and kind of figure out that problem? But okay, how do we help you attract new clinicians, right? Can we think about building like a recruitment mechanism or even like a marketplace for people to find you? How do we think about retaining clinicians better? And can we make their experience better by giving them technology to help unlock better retention and kind of reduce the staffing burden overall? Patient engagement side, right? All kinds of stuff we're doing around not only better communication, but can we actually start to build relationships between the patient and the agency in a way that builds some of that trust and kind of improves the overall outcomes in addition to just those operational metrics. So yeah, lot to build. It's
A lot.
it's a fun time. It's a fun time, but there's a lot going on there.
Good time to be a founder.
That's
Well,
right.
congrats again, and yeah, thanks for the conversation. This is really great, Adam. I'm gonna
Yeah.
throw your website up on the screen. I know you guys are hiring. Where else can people? Is your website the best place to go? Anywhere else to follow you or the company?
Yep, website's great. We got our careers page linked up there, so please do throw us an application if you're interested. Feel free to reach out at careers@axlehealth.com. And if there's any home health providers listening, feel free to reach out to sales@axlehealth.com or go to our website. But yeah, try to give people as much context as they'd want, both on the job side, but also on the product side as well. So website's great.
Amazing. Thanks again, Adam. Thanks for joining Built to Ship, and excited to keep watching the Axle Health journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler.
Have a good one.